All right, let's have prayer and we'll start. Thank you for another day. We commit it to you, Lord. We pray for those who are going to be visiting the Capitol, that have a good time and be a good learning experience. We continue to pray for brethren around the world who are suffering from a variety of challenges and political situations, spiritual warfare. And we know that as we study these cultures, we're dealing with an array of worldviews and attitudes toward specific situations and how the Word of God applies, and believers wrestle with these things. And we're here just to be reminded before you that we don't have all the answers, and we seek to become better aware of the issues and at least to have some tools to work with. And we pray that the tools that we discuss and consider would be of use to us as we prepare for that which you have in store for us. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. All right. We did this slide already. I'm just putting it up there again, just to remind us what we're talking about, right? Universalism says rules apply to everybody equally, and particularism says no, rules apply differently depending on social status or relationship. I would like to add another thought to this side right here. It's not just social status or relationship. Sometimes even circumstances come into the picture. For example, when my dad and mom were on their way to the hospital when my younger brother was undergoing surgery. He was just a tiny baby, and he had to have surgery because the pylorus in the digestive system wasn't functioning right, and he had a treatment referred to as pyloric stenosis, where they had to kind of open up the pylorus so that food could pass through. And they were nervous, they were in a hurry, and they were speeding to get to the hospital, and they got pulled over. And when they rolled down the window and the police officer came up the window, they said, "I'm sorry, our son is just our baby is just getting out of surgery, and we're just anxious to see him." And the police officer replied, "Follow me and I'll get you there. I don't want you to speed, but I'll go ahead of you and you just follow me." So that wasn't a question of social status or relationship, had nothing to do with it. He had no idea who they were, what their status in society was. But a circumstantial thing, made an exception. And so it's more than just that, but that's probably, in the larger picture, that's probably what drives this more than anything else. That makes sense. Any of you ever been in a situation where, because of circumstances, you were let off or, treated, a little more easily by a law enforcement person? Yeah. Yeah, Ella?
It's not really circumstances, but I speed. It's so bad. So I've gotten pulled over a few times. But like, if I'm going to or from work and I'm in scrubs, they always let me go. If I don't have like some reason, like something that's going on, he's just like, "Oh, it's okay."
So anytime you're in a hurry to get somewhere, just put the scrubs on and off you go.
Pretty much. You can get away with anything.
But I know you would never take advantage of that, right?
Oh,
no, not Ella. No. Delaney?
One time we were going to a funeral, and my mom was driving because my dad had it prepped, and it was like 4 hours away, and we were late, and my mom speeds a lot.
This is talking about women speeding here? Are we getting?
She's also a nurse, so it might be.
Oh.
But we got pulled over, and the officer was like, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" And mom was like, "A funeral," and he's doing it, and he was like, "Oh, go, go, go."
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So that type of thing happens not infrequently, and we've all probably experienced something like that. And if it's not something to do with the law, maybe it's at home because of a circumstance. You're treated a little bit more leniently. Yeah. A lot of fun. Things like that happen all the time. Okay, so I thought this was interesting. And again, you guys understand by now that these charts are subjective, and the research, is good or bad depending on who did it and how thorough they were and unbiased and all that. But, the question is posed, would you lie for a friend in court? Now, I did put one of those in your notes. It's not the same one, and you'll notice that the distribution of countries isn't necessarily exactly the same, okay? So this is, now you have one in your notes and one here to look at. You can compare them, so the would you lie for a friend in court, the blue says no, the percentage of those who would not lie. And again, this is very subjective. I guess we misspelled oh no, the I is there. It's just kind of Nigeria. Venezuela, and in the one in your, Venezuela's in that one as well. Now, please don't walk out of here, thinking badly about Venezuela, like there's something really bad about that country. Latin American countries in general are much more given to that. And so, in fact, I'm a little surprised that Venezuela, if I remember correctly, is the only Latin American country in this chart. For such a huge sector of global society, they're just giving you one example out of there. So, Miriam, are we being fair to Germany there? In general?
I don't know, because I guess so, but it surprised me that not more say no, because Germany's pretty much following the law. Like, Germans are pretty strict with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know, but probably, yeah.
Yeah. And again, but you notice it's still, even though they're up here, it's still 87%. The U.S. is close to that, 93. Canada would be about the same. Switzerland, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and I can't give you the reason for that. I've not dived into the Swiss, cultural situation to tell you why. Is Switzerland on this one as well? Yeah, it's also right up there near the top. So that would be an interesting study sometime. Okay. So, and of course, we keep talking about the problem of being stereotypical, right? So we have to be careful that we don't assume, if you take a trip to Venezuela, everybody and his brother is going to lie to you, total dishonesty. And if you go to Switzerland, everybody's going to tell you the absolute truth and, treat everybody the same. So, all right. So introducing the cultural dimension of rules, number one. And we did some of this already, but it's just kind of catching up here. There are rules for everyone. No one's permitted to ignore them. Particularism says we have special obligations to people we know which supersede legal obligations. I do want to point out the word obligations. There is no society that pays no attention to laws. I mean, what would you call that? What would you call a society that pays no attention to laws? Pardon? Anarchy, yeah. There's no such thing as an absolute anarchy, which, by the way, is, I don't believe that human government was invented after the Noahic flood. After the Noahic flood, God regulated certain things like not allowing, for murder, only capital punishment, and things like that. But to say that there was no such thing as government before the flood would be to create a situation that is contradictory to the way God wired man. God wired man to have dominion. And even though man fell, the concept of dominion and, order and laws and things like that were built into the human race. And those things weren't wiped out when man fell. They were just corrupted. So man, since the beginning, has always had a sense of obligation to government in some way, right? So the question is not, is the law important? The question is the law as important as my relationship to my family and close friends, relatives, things like that, okay? And just the testimonies that you guys gave now, are a reminder that even in our country, there are exceptions. Even here at Faith, if students come to us, for instance, I might tell you, if you don't turn in an assignment on time, you're going to get, deducted for that. But when a student comes to me and says, Dr. Mark, I have this situation, or this came up, can I get an extension? Very, very rarely will I say no. Okay, so am I dealing particularly or universally in this case? Well, particularly. A standard, an automatic deduction has been waived because you came to me and explained your situation, and I said, I understand, that's okay. Right? And most of the professors do that around here. You guys have probably all experience it. That is an example of particularism, in a certain sense. All right? I don't think, can you imagine living in a society where there was absolutely zero flexibility in rules? I mean, can you imagine living here on campus where there's zero flexibility to the rules in the student handbook? See, I can't imagine. It would be, the only way that would work is if you had a perfect legal system. And not only a perfect legal system, but you would also have to have perfect people ready to abide by it. And neither one of those is true. All right. We talked about this also last class period, blind justice. Does it work everywhere, anywhere? But that's very much related to, particularism. Kind of, just imagine the blindfolded Lady Liberty, I don't know who that is, but the blindfold. What particularism does is it takes the blindfold and it goes, whoosh, okay, and then, and universalism says, leave the blindfold on. And so no legal system in our world leaves the blindfold completely on all the time. Or if it is, it's got holes in it. It's kind of like the dad that says, okay, go ahead, you go ahead and hide. Tells the little kid to hide, but he's doing this. All right, I thought this was an interesting illustration of this whole thing. Universalism searches for what is systematic and tries to impose rules, laws, and norms on all of its members so that all things can run more efficiently. Whereas particularism searches for what is different or unique or exceptional in order to create something that is incomparable or of special quality. That's kind of a neat illustration of that. That comes from the University of Texas, and you could find other illustrations like that. Yeah. All right. Let's, all right, characteristics of them. And there they are, number 2 down at the bottom. Characteristics of universalist cultures. The focus is primarily on rules. Again, the word primarily is important. By the way, can I say this too? It's kind of a side comment. Even in the Christian life, in the church, in a Christian home, we wrestle with this, right? I grew up in the James Dobson era, if you will, where, there's a ton of emphasis on focus on the family and all that stuff. It was good stuff. But there was a lot of preaching when I was becoming a young parent or getting ready to get married. Lots and lots of preaching on spanking. You've got to, discipline, and all the references. I have in one of my Bibles, I have all of the references in Proverbs that talk about the rod. They're all underlined or highlighted in some way. And even in Brazil, when I would do like family conferences or things like that, and we would spend a session talking about discipline, man, I went through all those passages on the rod. And this may sound really cruel, and you may decide not to trust me after this, but the first time I spanked my daughter, Sarah, who's our oldest child, is when she was 3 months old. We were traveling to meet the Council of Baptist Mid-Missions in order to do our interview with them. And we were in this little Subaru, and we were driving on Route 90 through one of the Dakotas, and it was blistery cold. I mean, we were driving through a blizzard, and had the heat on full blast. So we were already tense. We got to a motel that night, okay, and we got out, and she just decided to have a fit. And so she's still wearing her diaper, and I gave her a spanking. The first time I remember giving her, 3 months old, okay? And and man, she looked at me like, what'd you just do? And then all of a sudden just wailed, Yeah, but I had determined that she was not going to get away with 1 inch of disobedience. We were going to nip it in the bud every single time. Man, bam, bam, bam. Now, I wasn't cruel to her, okay? And I'll just be honest, we did that more consistently with our first 2 kids than we did with the last 2 kids. But looking back, we were probably a little better at it by the time we got to the last two kids. But I had this idea of, universalism. I mean, I didn't know these terms back then and how this related to culture, but that was my mindset. She is going to keep every rule all the time, and if she doesn't, there will be discipline, right away. And I've changed a lot since those early days. Okay. And maybe some of you are firstborn have experienced that. A lot of times the firstborn suffer more than the others because mom and dad want to get it right, at the very beginning. So anyway, focus on rules. Legal contracts are readily drawn up. And in a universalistic culture, okay, what makes the document binding, the legal document? What makes it binding? Yeah, isn't that weird? Think about that. You sign your name and it's binding, right? And if it's notarized, and there's a witness there, it's binding. My wife and I just did our wills up in Ames with a lawyer up there. And we went in day before yesterday to sign them. And there were two ladies that came in the room with us and these are the witnesses. There had to be witnesses there to the signing of these, and all they were just, who's going to get what when we die. Not that we have a whole lot to give away anyway, but it's just the legal, who's the what do you call not executioner, what do you call it, executor of the will. But the witnesses were there, and it was all done very legally and very appropriately. Okay, that is a mark of a universalist culture. Okay, there's only one truth or reality. Okay, everything. I'm sorry, I missed one. A trustworthy person honors his or her word or contract. Okay. There's only one truth or reality, and a deal is a deal. Hey, you signed it, you agreed to this, game over. Okay, what's done is done. Okay. Now, what's on the other side of this? In contrast to that, the focus is on the relationship. There are terms. In fact, they probably wouldn't even use the word rules. They would probably say, there are terms or conditions that we've established, but they're all done for the sake of relationship. Okay, now just think about that. If the primary motive is the relationship, then the rules or laws or conditions or whatever become subservient to the people involved. And that changes the way that things are carried out. Okay? In other words, it's kind of like, remember when Jesus said, what did he say about man and the Sabbath that would relate to this? Do you remember his statement about the relationship between man and the Sabbath? Yeah, think about that. The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So, is this particularism? Is it universalism? Or is it something else? How do you understand that statement? What was Jesus trying to say by that? Jules?
That it was God who first was the one who established it.
Well, it is true. But the question is, why did God establish it? Did God establish the Sabbath for man's benefit, or did he create man to serve the Sabbath? Pardon?
Man's benefit.
Yeah. He said that the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. In other words, God didn't give us his law. The Sabbath represents the bigger law, right? It's just one example. God didn't give the law of Moses to his people in order to be the end game. The law was intended to be a vehicle, a guide through which the people of God could benefit in their relationship to him. It was an opportunity for them to be able to exercise faith in the Abrahamic covenant through this vehicle called the Law of Moses. And so the Law of Moses was never intended to be the final motive, the end game. It was intended to be a channel, a servant that would benefit the people of God. And let me just say this to you too, there's another side note. When it comes to raising children, something my wife and I really tried to if children in a Christian home ever sense that the ultimate goal of everything that we're doing in this family is to obey the rules, to obey the laws of God, you're going to have a problem. And I'm not against obeying God's commandments, okay? But if that's the end game, if the end game is the rules, okay, you're going to have an issue on your hands. God gave us His revelation for the benefit of, obviously, it's to glorify God, but He gave it to us as a means through which we can honor Him. It's about the relationship and not about the law itself. Legal contracts are modified. Well, wait a second. Once you sign your name to a contract, do you have a legal right to change the contract? Well, not in a universalist culture. But in a particularist culture, how could you justify, just try to imagine you live in a particularist culture, how could you justify modifying a law that's already been signed for? Both parties have signed. How could you justify changing something that's already been established? Jules?
Maybe like the relationship between the two people changed, and like the person, like you're not on good terms anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't like they don't want to carry out their side, or you don't want to carry
Okay, all right. Yeah, the relationship between those who signed it may change, or the circumstances that were true when the contract was signed are no longer true. And so in a particularist culture, everybody understands when you sit down to sign a contract that this contract is being signed by these two people in this situation under these circumstances. But if those change, then there has to be room for flexibility. Okay? Now you say, well, okay, then if that's the case, then what guarantee do you have that anything can be, why even sign it in the first place? Well, it's because there's no such thing as a purely particularistic or purely universalistic culture, okay? But there is flexibility built in. So let's say that you're in a particularist country and culture, and you start a church, and you make decisions as a congregation of what you're going to do, okay? And then all of a sudden you find that the people aren't going by what was decided, and you're wondering what's going on, and you said, this is what we decided, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. Okay, then why aren't we doing it? Well, because, and it's going to be easy for you as a universalist, in concept, to say, well, we can't do that. And you may be right. I'm not saying that you have to just throw everything to the wind, okay? But at least, I just encourage you, at least step back and say, wait a minute, maybe there's an element of truth here that I need to consider. Maybe we need to get back together and say, things have changed. Is there a consensus here that we need to modify this? So it's tricky business. It really is. But just be careful that you don't accuse people on this side over here of being, dishonest or wishy-washy because they modify something that was decided. Very interesting. All right. Did we get to the other ones down there or not? No, sorry. Trustworthy person acknowledges that circumstances change. There may be several perspectives on reality, different ways of looking at this when you make that decision. Okay. Yesterday's message in chapel. Did you all hear it, Kurt? Okay. So, where does universalism come in that story that he told about the basketball game? What's the universal element there? Yeah, Emma.
Technically, he broke the rule that was stated.
Yeah, which was?
Which was each one of his players had to play a certain amount of minutes.
Yeah, and I don't know how many minutes we're talking here, but probably not a lot, But rules are rules. you have to forfeit. I'm just telling you, if that basketball game had been played in Brazil, that would never have happened. Just telling you, okay? But because we are a very universalist culture, but you remember what he said? He knew in the back of his mind, as probably did everybody else, that really didn't influence the game because the guy that was shorted minutes was actually a starter, one of his better players. So that mindset in a particularist culture would have probably decided the issue. People would have walked out of that room and said, no, obviously. This is not a question of, this is one of his better players. Don't worry about it. Game's over, you guys win, legitimately. And people would be good with that. But in a universalist culture, rules are rules, and we got to go by that. Soccer, some of you soccer players. In the World Cup now, they have stoppage time, okay, and they pretty much have to be true to that. If they say 3 minutes of stoppage time, within a few seconds, they really have to stick to that. But you probably don't remember, I don't think you were born back before they changed this, where stoppage time was never known by anybody except the referees. The 90-minute mark would come and the game keeps going, the clock keeps ticking, and nobody's upset about it. Because the referee, when he feels like enough time has been spent to make up for all the injuries and the red cards and all that stuff, then he'll call the game. And everybody's good with that, see? But there came a time, because of Western influence in the World Cup, Westerners are the ones that spoke up and said, we got to have something a little bit more fixed than that. We can't just let the referee be down there and do whatever he wants to do. And so, the more the universalist mindset kicked in, they said, okay, we'll make a deal. We'll have stoppage time, but the referee has to say how many minutes. So they came up with a nice median, solution to the problem, a compromise that worked. See? All that has to do with this whole issue. 90 minutes is 90 minutes. You guys, when I was a kid, the Russian basketball team beat the U.S. in the finals in the Olympics one year. And they claimed that they added a few extra seconds to the clock at the end, to make it happen. But there was no, what do you call it back then? There was no replays, huh? Yeah, well, yeah, replay. Yeah. What do you call it? Come on, what's the? No. Huh?
In soccer, it's called VAR.
VAR? What's that stand for? Oh.
Visual replay assistant.
Okay.
Like referee.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
I don't know.
Anyway, you get the idea. Now, civil law versus common law. So number 4 in your notes is legal considerations. Okay. So, and I don't know how much you guys have studied law and that sort of thing, but very simply put, civil law refers to decisions that are made based on a legal code that applies to everyone equally. Universalism. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not commit adultery, right? And those things. Laws that apply to everybody. Common law, on the other hand, decisions are made based on precedents. Let me see here. Can you think of a rule or law that was established in the Bible because of a circumstance that happened, which became precedents after that? There aren't a lot, but there are some. Ladies, there's one that pertains to women specifically. It has to do with inheriting the property of the ancestors. It's in the book of Deuteronomy. It's the daughters of Zelophehad. Does that ring a bell to anybody? Okay, they came to Moses because their father died and there were no sons. And the law said that the inheritance goes to the son. And if there's no son, then it goes to, some other near relative. And the daughters of Zelophehad came to Moses and they said, our father died and here we are, we have no brother and we're going to lose this land. And Moses said, excuse me, I'm going to go talk to the Lord about it. And the Lord said, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. they have a case. And so they made a new law in Israel saying that the daughters could receive the inheritance in the case where there were no brothers. So that is an example of what we call common law. It's a situation that necessitated a law, and that became the precedent for future situations in Israel. And that every one of your towns or cities has some of that. In fact, if you go back to the books, have you ever done that where you go back and look at the old books of the law and you see that they still have some of those laws on the books, like you can't chain your horse up to a post, within so many feet of the, I mean, you might be surprised at some of the laws that just never got cleaned out of the books. And they were because somebody's horse accidentally, broke a window or something, or so they'd established a law, and some of those are still in the books today if you go and look back. That's what. Well, what about bribery and corruption? Oh, this is fun. Fun. All right, letter B, bribery and corruption. Examples of Africa and Europe. Now, look, Paul's not here, so in his defense, in his absence, I'll just say that Africa takes it on the chin. Africa gets beat up when it comes to when people start talking about bribery and things like that. Africa always becomes one of the first examples, and that's unfortunate because bribery and dishonesty exists everywhere. Okay, but and part of the reason for that is because a lot of colonialism was done on the continent of Africa, and so there was a lot of Western interaction with African nations. So people start talking about that. So now Europeans, number one, may accuse Africans of excessive use of bribery, and they do. Yeah. In fact, look, talk about particularism and universalism. I think you're all aware that even today in the United States, it's just a fact, okay? I'm not trying to be racist when I make this statement, but even today, honest police officers will tell you that all else being equal, if they pull over a black person, okay, the assumptions that often go along with that maybe there was something that happened, are much easier to make than if it's a white person. When I went to Chicago several years ago, I did my certificate on cultural intelligence, and there were 2 or 3 black people in the room. There were maybe 20 of us all together. And the guy that led it, David Livermore, did something pretty courageous, actually, but he said, here's what I'd like you guys to do. He said, I want you all to line up against the wall here. This end over here will be people that you feel would be least likely to be under suspicion if they were pulled over by a police officer. And down at that end, those of you who think you would be most likely to be under suspicion. Now, this is way back before Black Lives Matter. This is back in I think I did this in 2014, okay? And you know what happened? I mean, immediately, those 2 or 3 black people went right to the end of the line. And nobody was offended by that. He looked at it and said, what do you see there? And they smiled, and everybody else smiled, and they said, yeah, we recognize that this is a thing. This happens, okay? And so, prejudice does play a role in particularism and universalism as well. And as hard as our culture has tried to eliminate those prejudices, they're going to be there because we live in a fallen world, and you're never going to completely remove them. In fact, I would say this to you guys, and I think you'll understand. There's a sense in which all of us struggle with some sort of ethnocentrism or racism or whatever. Nobody is completely purified of that. That's just part of being in a fallen world. Okay? And part of it is now, you can take that to extreme and say, well, we got to have courses where people, are trained to understand their white privilege and all that, and that's just gone out to lunch. But anyway, this does happen. Number 2, African leaders respond. And they say the Europeans have been corrupt in providing arms and aid, and yes, they have. Colonialists have often taken advantage of countries where they are, not just in Africa, but in India and other places, and they have used their wealth and their power in order to pull strings. So are they being any more integral? Are they showing any more integrity than the natives who live there? See, that's a good question. And That's one that they will respond with. 3, what's the difference between a bribe and a tip? Or is there? Have any of you ever worked as servers or in a job where a tip is expected? Anybody? You've had a job? Jules, you did?
Oh, wait, no, I just know a job.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So is there a difference between a bribe and a tip? If you eat out somewhere and, you leave your server a 15% tip or whatever it is, are you bribing? Is that the same thing as a bribe, just another clothing? If not, what's the difference? Yeah.
Well, when I think of a tip, it's something after they have done something for you. Normally, a bribe is to get something from them.
Say that again. Would you repeat that?
When you give someone a tip, it's after they have done a service.
Okay.
For you, and a bribe is to get them to do something for you.
Oh, okay. So a tip is in response to service well done, whereas a bribe is to motivate somebody to serve well. Okay, now I understand that, and you're right. But is there not a sense in which the anticipation of a tip has the same effect? In other words, chronologically, one may happen after the other, but isn't the motivation still the same? In other words, if you're the server at the table, are you not going to serve extra well in anticipation of a little extra when they pay the bill? Isn't that the reason why we even do tips in the first place? The purpose of tips, well, some would say the purpose of it is so that the restaurant doesn't have to pay their workers as much. But there's more than that. It's deeper than that. So you're right. Chronologically, that happens that way, but the motivation can be the same either way. Okay, that's a good point. Anybody else want to comment on that? The difference between a bribe and a tip? Yeah, Jules?
Sometimes, well, like, bribes too, but like tips, at least at my job, you can't always accept them. Bribes, like, you're literally, like, you choose to accept it, but I would just say it comes down to the motive of why you're doing things.
Okay. All right, the motive. All right. Okay. So if a Brazilian police officer pulls me over and they don't make nearly as good a wage as most American police officers make, and I can tell that he's looking for something, and I feel bad for him. He's got a family he's trying to feed, and he's out here in the heat of the day, and his uniform is even sweaty, and okay, I feel bad for him. Is it okay in that case for me to give him a bribe to let me go because I know it's going to help him and his family? Say, well, what if I take the ticket, and then after he gives me the ticket, then I give him a little something afterwards? Does that become a tip then instead of a bribe? Because I already got my ticket. I'm going to have to pay this. But now, in spite of that, I'm going to give him something extra. This thing gets really, it's not as cut and dried as we'd often like it to be. Here. How's a restaurant server who receives a tip different from an underpaid police officer who receives a bribe? That's the question we just asked. Universalists often pay others to bribe for them. I'll give you an example. I send a bunch of stuff with me to the mission field, okay, but I send it in a container on a ship, okay? And then after a few weeks, I'm notified in my country that the ship is in port, and I can go and I can receive my goods. Now, I'm just going to tell you, in almost any country in the world where there's a seaport and goods come in, you're not just going to get those for the stated price. Just not going to happen, okay? There's more that has to be given, and it's not going to be given within the contract. You know what I'm saying? So I have a choice now. Am I going to personally go to the port and pull out a little extra and slip it to him under the table so that he'll give me my goods in time? Because if I don't, I may be waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks, month, 2 months, who knows? Well, things are slow, blah, blah, blah. But if I just pay him a little extra under the table, that thing's out there in a half hour and I'm gone with it. Now, I can do that, or I can hire somebody who's called a broker. And I pay the broker because the broker is going to go out and bribe the guy at the port for me in order to get things out quickly. And my broker is not going to pay everything that I gave him to the guy he's bribing. He's going to give him part of it, and he's going to keep the rest for himself. So I can bribe myself, or I can pay the broker to bribe him for me. Morally, is there a difference? You see what I'm saying? We clean things up to make them look good, but in essence, we're still going through that same process. So some would say, I'll never ship anything to port because I don't want to be involved in bribes. Well, life just isn't that easy. There are things like that in a lot of sectors of society. All I'm trying to do is get you to stop thinking, maybe you already are, but not to think black and white. You either bribe or you don't. There are times when you find a nice legal way to pay somebody to bribe in your place. Go ahead, Justin. Thanks for checking that out. It's under the 2022-3, and then the mission video clips. Should be. It's a PowerPoint. All they have to do is just hit start, and the audio and everything will automatically come on.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, thanks, man. All right, well, since he did that for me, I'm going to give him a little bit better grade than I give the rest of you guys, right? Because he's being my helper today. Do you understand where I'm going with this? Life is messy. And and why are we talking about this? Because some of you are going to end up in cross-cultural ministries where this kind of thing happens openly. And we have devised ways to make it happen a little bit more cleanly. Yeah, Emma?
I think she had.
Oh, sorry.
So my youth pastor they take frequent, like probably once a summer, to go down to Mexico to help churches there. And their legal system also uses bribery on a regular basis if you get pulled over and stuff. Do you think that there is warrant for if the legal system functions on bribes? Like they would rather just have you pay it then, so to speak? Obviously it goes to them and it's different. Do you think that it's wrong in all instances if the legal system functions like basically purely on bribes used that way?
Yeah, that's a really, really, really good question. I mean, if you're in a country where bribery is so interwoven that there is practically no way to do business with the government without it, then that's a question you have to ask. Am I willing to go? If God is leading me there, I mean, there are some countries where it'll become virtually impossible for you not to involve a tip or bribe in some way in order to get something done. And so you're going to have to make a decision. Do I decide I'm not going there? Or, if you say I'm going to go there, but I'm not going to do this, you'll probably not get anything done. The other way to look at it is to say, this is understood even on a government level that bribery is built in. And so there's a certain sense in which the expectation of bribery actually becomes part of the law. And that's a very, very subjective thing. We're not used to that kind of thinking in our culture. We're used to thinking that everything is defined in the law, and this is the price, this is the condition, and that's it. But other countries don't view it that way. They don't view. Did I already tell you the story when we built our church in Brazil? I went down to City Hall and I got a form. I thought maybe I'd said this, but I got this document. These are the things that you have to have done, checked off, before you can get your permit to use the building, whatever that's called, user permit or something. There were like 13 things on there, and I took that to my construction guy. He was a Brazilian guy, the guy that was the builder. He looked at that and he laughed. He said, oh, Pastor Mark, no. You do this one, and this one. And that's it. And I said, well, it says I have to do all these. They have 13 of them there because they want a way to keep people that they don't want to build from building. If they don't want you to build a church or some other kind of building, they will make you check all these, and even if you do, they'll probably have something else to give you that you have to do as well because they will try to keep you from doing it. So the purpose of these 13 is not because they're all necessary and expected, but because it gives them the leverage to control who builds and who doesn't. You do these 3 and you'll be good. So I did those 3. He took the document down, got it signed off, and we built our church. So we're not used to that here. And yet, I went and got my driver's license renewed. I got my real ID just last week. And I went online, they said, bring this, and this document, proof of Social Security, of address, of your name, and all that. And actually, I went down and beat my number, and I went there, and the guy says, okay, what do you got? And I showed him this. He says, okay. And I had 2 or 3 other documents. He said, no, that's all I need. Good enough. I thought, is that because I'm an honest-looking guy? But, I found out that they didn't really need everything that they told me I had to bring. And I brought extra just in case. So this is real. It really is. And your question is very good, Emma. It's not an easy thing. And missionaries have struggled. People that really want to honor the Lord and be honest have wrestled with these issues. And what about God's smuggler? What about saying that I'm going on a missions trip, but I apply for a tourist visa, and I'm actually going to be doing Christian work? Well, you have to understand that the country, when they say tourist visa, they understand that people come to do more than just look at the beautiful sights. If you say you're applying for a Christian workers visa, that to the government often implies that you're going to be exchanging money, you're going to be doing business, establishing some sort of a corporation, or some sort of interaction there, which you're not doing on a missions trip. And therefore, a tourist visa satisfies the situation. But it is interesting. All right, well, we got to come back to this a little bit more next time. I'm spending a little more time on this because it is thorny, and I appreciate your comments. All right, see you next time.